One of my favorite fall vegetables is the pumpkin. It's versatile, it's fun, and it's truly American. But not all pumpkins are created equal. If you look at the one we have here, this is a pie pumpkin. And if you're going to use your pumpkin in the kitchen, this is the kind you need to have. The reason being that it doesn't have as much stringiness to it, and also it's meatier. Here's one that's cut up already, and it's got a thicker part to it that you can actually use. They also tend to be a little bit smaller, and they tend to be more sweet. Now, pumpkins grow in the soil, and so when you're beginning to use them, you need to make sure that the first thing you do with it is to wash it off. Often they'll have just plain old dirt on them, but they can also harbor bacteria. And while this is going to be cooked and the bacteria that would be on it will be destroyed, we want to make sure that it doesn't cross-contaminate the counter and other surfaces and your hands and just move bacteria such as E. coli, which could be there, onto other foods that won't be cooked later. So make sure you wash it. A little bit of soapy water would be fine, and then pat it dry. Now, you have several options when it comes to cooking the pumpkin. You can either cut it into chunks and boil it. You can microwave it, as long as you make sure that you cut it into chunks first so that it doesn't explode. You can bake it, you can roast it, you can grill it. But one of the things that's easiest to do for making a pie is to simply bring it inside after you've cleaned it off, bring it to a counter, take a good hefty knife and cut it in half horizontally. This is one of the primary reasons that I want to make sure you pat it dry, because if you're going to use a big knife, you want to make sure that you can get a good grip. So cut it in half horizontally, and then you need to de-seed it. You can save the seeds for roasting or toasting or frying if you choose to, but they do need to come out of here before we do a lot of cooking. Now, the tool that I've found that works best for me is a grapefruit spoon, and it's because it's got a serrated edge, and that allows me to have a little bit more traction, a little bit more grip with it than a regular spoon would have, and it's safer than a knife. So particularly if you have kids working with you, you either need to have one of the tools that are particularly designed for using to hollow out a pumpkin, or a grapefruit spoon would work really well with them also. Now, once you get it hollowed out and ready to go. See, this is one that I've cut simply in half. You can put this on a sheet, a cake pan that's got about 1 inch side. Now, one of the problems that tends to happen if you're baking pumpkin is that the edges tend to dry out, just like other squash do. So what I like to do is take either the chunks or the half and put them in a pan with a lip on it and put a little bit of water in there, maybe 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch. And then put it in the oven as it is. Now, usually with this size of a pumpkin, you can put it in about 350 and check it after about 40-45 minutes. Probably if it's not done at that point, it'll be done within an hour. You simply take a knife, stick it inside. If it becomes tender, they also tend to collapse because they no longer have the seeds and the tissue is softening during baking. So you're going to end up with something that looks more like this. They'll brown a bit and so on also. Notice we didn't have to take the stem off ahead of time. Now, at this point, you're going to want to let it cool enough that you can handle easily. One of the things that we find with pumpkin that's cooked, whether it's this pumpkin or any kind of squash, is that they're a high water vegetable. So that one of the problems that people often have, in addition to choosing the wrong kind of pumpkin and ending up with something that's too stringy, is that they try to make their recipe and it doesn't work because the water content is too high, and that throws off the moisture balance with the dry ingredients. So what I recommend that you do is, while it's cooling, you can set it in a colander or prop it up a little bit to make sure that a fair amount of the liquid will drain off. Then you peel it, and you'll have it in big chunks like this. Now again, there's a lot of water left in here, but we need to puree it in some form or fashion. And so again, you have several options. You can use a food processor, you can use a blender, you can use a potato masher to try and puree it down. You could use a fork if you chose to. My chosen method is to use a ricer, just like you would use when you make potatoes. Now, I've chosen to use one that has the larger grid on the bottom because we don't want it too finely pureed, and because there are strings here that are going to clog that up if you have the finer ricer on the bottom. So simply put in chunks, lots of chunks or smaller chunks. I tend to find if I have too much, it comes out the sides, so we'll start with a small amount. Let's move this potato out of, mashing potatoes here, I guess, with the ricer, so that's a potato too. Move the pumpkin out of the way. Now simply press on the ricer and notice the amount of liquid. That's simply liquid that's coming out, and this we don't want to have in our pumpkin pie. So gradually we'll have some pumpkin come out of there, and you can scrape that off. Now, in order for this to work in a pie or a bread recipe, what will have to be done is that is also going to have to be drained. Is also going to have to be drained away. So once you do this amount of work, then again you set it back into the colander or a strainer and let this drain too. Now sometimes you'll find one that's not quite as runny, or you may have let it drain longer ahead of time. But you can see as we pour this off here, as I pour this into the colander, that's a lot of water that we need to get rid of. So you go ahead and do that until you get something that looks like the kind of pumpkin that you would come out of a can with. A lot of us are more familiar with using the canned pumpkin for holiday seasons rather than doing it this way. So drain it down so that no more of the water is coming off. You don't really need to squeeze it, but you need to get a fair amount of it out. Then you can use it in your favorite recipe, however you normally would use pumpkin. Notice that this, in comparison to canned pumpkin, is a lighter color, and in part that may be due to different varieties, but also during the canning process there's a lot more heat exposure, and that also is going to tend to darken the color a little bit. I think you'll find if you try this you get a really fresh flavor that's a little bit different. The appearance is a little bit different than the traditional pumpkin pie. Again, a little bit lighter in color, less orange, more yellow. But people in your family are going to appreciate it, particularly if you have kids that you can involve in doing this. Also remember, pumpkin is particularly nutritious. It is a functional food, as we've been talking about all season, in that it has a lot of pre-vitamin A, beta-carotene, which is going to be helpful to you as it helps reduce your risk of cancer and increases your long-term benefits of health, as well as to just helping you get through the day-to-day of living. Go ahead and try making a real pumpkin pie out of a real pumpkin this season. You can freeze the extra. There will be more than enough for one pie, so that a little bit of work on one day can get you through maybe the entire Thanksgiving, Christmas season.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.